Hello, friends, and welcome to our Sunday Secular Buddhist Essentials class. My name is Venerable Tarpa. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you. It's a beautiful day here in South Bend, Indiana, 70 degrees outside. I'm going to go for a nice walking meditation after class. Um, with that said, let's move on to our class. I'd like to start with some beginning affirmations. This is a community gathering affirmation. Today, I feel fortunate to sit as a member of this kind community in the safety and security of like minded friends, sharing this present moment with others dedicated to the cultivation of goodness. Today, I'm grateful for the direction and support that this community provides, a community worthy of my time and commitment, a community where my efforts have meaning, purpose, and are appreciated. Today, I'm thankful for this community of awakening, a place to gain the knowledge and skills to improve my life, a family, a home, and a sanctuary for all of us seeking refuge from the storm. And as conscientious practitioners, we must recognize our responsibility to the world, to strive to live skillfully while helping others to do the same, to strive to live in balance and harmony with nature and others, to strive to gain mastery over our minds and embody our true benevolent nature, to expand our hearts and minds, transcending our shared human limitations, to not intentionally harm sentient life or our planet, and to maturely accept and embrace the reality of our situation while striving to improve it. Oh, so nice to be here, everybody. So I think this is our third class. We're just starting up the Secular Buddhist Essentials program. And we're kind of going through a lot of the introduction to Buddhism stuff. Um, Last week we talked a bit about who the Buddha was. Today we're going to talk about what the Buddha taught. And so I found that in the earliest Buddhist texts, there's an infamous, uh, beautiful quote that I believe is the most concise and comprehensive teachings of the Buddha. It's legendary. And it's a quote that clearly summarizes the Buddha's path to awakening. And it's so simple and so elegant and so timely. Quote, do no wrong, cultivate only good, purify your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So simple, so clear, and and ultimately just so accurate. Do no wrong, cultivate only good, purify your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So the Buddha's teachings were actually built upon decades of previous Indian thought, with beliefs like enlightenment and rebirth and karma, which are found in traditional Buddhism. They were in place long before the Buddha ever appeared. A lot of the things that people give Buddhism credit for actually were already existing. Um, but what the Buddha found was a mental state of awakening that he called nirvana. The expression nirvana didn't exist before the Buddha. So there's a handful of topics or assertions that scholars claim is unique to Buddhism, but oddly they all share different lists. So one of them is the idea of dependent origination, that all things exist um, as processes, right? And they're and in a sense of interdependence. We're going to be learning about that later in this teaching series. But the idea that things aren't just standalone objects, they're not static objects or elements. Instead, we all exist as processes with all kinds of pieces and parts and causes and conditions happening that come together to make us who we are, to make reality, to make our lives the way they are. Um, and another thing that people attribute to Buddhism is mindfulness, that didn't exist before the Buddha comes in. And I would assert also insight meditation. I think the meditations that the Buddha learned from various teachers before his enlightenment were basically calm abiding practices. And so the whole idea of mindfulness, insight meditation is quite uniquely the Buddha's, right? Um, but getting back to this idea of this mental state of awakening that the Buddha called nirvana. And according to the Buddha, this state is not just mere hypotheses. It's not philosophy. It's not something he conjured up, but it was actually something that he had a direct experience about himself, an experience that changed him forever. When the Buddha becomes enlightened, this is his experience of nirvana. Um, but when asked to describe the enlightened state, he would insist that its nature couldn't be conveyed by language, that it was too nuanced, right? That it was something that needed to be experienced directly for oneself. And his monks would press him, and they'd say, what is nirvana? And initially, he would only say that nirvana is the end of suffering, which defined the Buddha's defines nirvana and the Buddha's teachings as a method for liberating people from suffering. So last week we talked a lot about, what is Buddhism? Everybody asks, is it a religion? Is it a philosophy? And my answer was, well, I think it's all of those things. I think it's not just one thing. But the Buddha, in his language, called it a dharma, right? Uh, and dharma is uh, is translated as can be translated as. I'm sorry, I have to review something. I read a piece by Richard Gumbridge, and he used the most beautiful expression. Oh, he used the word doctrine. I remember. I don't know how beautiful that is, but I think I think that's a nice definition of Dharma is doctrine, a teaching and path, way of life, right? Okay. So, anyways, when we talk about Buddhism, what is it? Well, yes, it's a religion. You know, it has all the religious elements that you'd imagine, except for a creator God. That's the one that's missing, right? Buddhism isn't based on a creator God. We don't entertain the idea of it, but the rest of it's in there. Your heavens and hells, mystical creatures and planes of existence. It's all in there. Um, but ultimately, what Buddhism really is, it's a path to liberate ourselves from suffering. This was what the Buddha set out to do, and this is what his practice is about. Um, and and the Buddha talked about that he saw that our suffering was clearly arising from a distorted or mistaken view about the nature of ourselves and reality. He saw the problem as a psychological problem, right? For most of us, we have basic needs met, right? We have food, we have shelter, things like that. But the Buddha thought that the majority of our suffering doesn't come from those physical things. The majority of it is psychological in nature, that we have a distorted view of ourselves, of our reality, of our community, how we interact, a distorted view of life itself. And through that wrong view, we make bad choices. It's that simple. We don't really know what we want. We've got an idea. We want happiness, but we're not quite sure what kind of happiness, what kind of fulfillment. We kind of stumble through life. Um, but and he talked about it being similar to following a faulty map, right? That you're going through life, you have a basic idea of where you're going, but it's just not clear enough to to be able to attain what you're looking for. And of course, what we're really trying to gain here is flourishing in life, not just getting by in life, not just surviving, but actually developing enough knowledge and skill to actually flourish in our lives, right? To take advantage of this birth and really do something spectacular with it. And of course, it's because of this distorted view that the Buddha believes we're constrained to lives of unsatisfactory existence, right? In which real lasting happiness and contentment continuously eludes us. Clearly, we find happiness all the time, right? We spend time with friends, get a nice big scoop of ice cream. There's a lot of happiness to be found in life. But when we're talking about real lasting happiness that pervades our lives, this is the one that's hard for us to attain. Um, but the Buddha asserted through clearly understanding the true nature of ourselves in reality that these distorted views can be removed as if washing away dirt from a dirty window in order to produce clarity and light. And so basically, the Buddha is saying when you understand who you are, what you are, how life works, you understand reality to some extent. The more you understand that, the better life gets. And it's really simple. When you understand how life works, you understand your goals better, you make better choices in achieving those goals, and you have a better chance of reaching those goals, right? So it said when the Buddha in his day invited people to hear his teachings, he would use the phrase "e paseko," which is a Pali term, meaning come and investigate. Now, I always thought that this was a really important aspect of the Buddhist teachings, that the Buddha becomes an awakened being, but he doesn't come out and start telling everybody he knows everything and listen to what he says. He doesn't lay down a doctrine that everybody has to follow. Instead, he comes in with this attitude, come and investigate it for yourself, right? This is what is at the heart of Buddhism. Buddhism has respect for the practitioner. Buddhism has respect for the different qualities of mind. The Buddha believed that people had the ability to discern the truth for themselves. They were allowed to ask important and deep questions. And, or in a sense, you'd say, within Buddhism, we often say, the truth needs to be known for oneself, because he understood that he could talk to his blue in the face, but to really understand his teachings, you would have to have the direct experience of it. So he's asking us to come in, explore the teachings, see if they resonate with us, and to see for ourselves if the methods lead to happiness. And if they led to happiness, continue to practice them. If they lead to suffering, abandon them, right? This is very unusual for a religion, right? Most religions are pretty set on this is what God says, do it or we'll punish you, right? The Buddha's quite the opposite in that regard. What do you guys think of that? Any thoughts? It's kind of a pretty notion, huh? Miss Wamo?
Yeah, I have a question, Tarpa. Do you think that because the Buddha didn't say exactly what nirvana was, except for that it's a path from suffering, that there was an overemphasis about suffering in the early Buddhism? Do you think that that's why there was such an emphasis on it because that's all he was willing to say?
Actually, now I think it's the opposite. In
Okay.
early Buddhism, the Buddha was less focused. Yes, the Buddha his first teaching is about suffering and how to overcome it. But actually, the Nikaya Sutras, the earliest sutras, there's so much more about happiness. Especially the Mahayana, they really get into ideas like life is suffering, period, which the Buddha never said. The Buddha's quoted as saying life is suffering, but it's not true. He talks about life being pervaded by suffering, but he also talks about life being pervaded by happiness. And in fact, in one quote, a monk is asking him about this, and the Buddha says, if there wasn't happiness and joy or pleasure in life, people wouldn't be enamored by it. People wouldn't be stuck in samsara if it wasn't pleasurable. So I think that that's a big mistake in modern scholarship, and I think where people are starting to turn back to it. But there's so many quotes by the Buddha on happiness and pleasure. There was another one that talks about the Four Noble Truths aren't understood through pain and suffering. The Four Noble Truths are understood through pleasure and happiness. That's I can give you the direct quote for that in the sutra if you like. So yeah, a beautiful point, and it leads to other thoughts as well. Let's get to some questions. I think I'm going to share that in a little bit. Patrick, please.
You had asked,
You're on mute.
oh, thank you. I think you had asked what I found, first question was like what I found, what I liked about Buddhism, or based on your first thing. And um, uh, the way he says, like, to encourages us to test it out and see. It's like that's what I was thinking. That's what drew me to secular Buddhism, because it was very much um, a he doesn't privilege himself from the truth which he says he has acquiesced. So like he says, I had the truth, but I'm not weighed from having to demonstrate it. So therefore, I'll give you something small to do. We need to do something. But if you find it's not true, it's almost a self-confidence that if you find it's not true, discard it. It's almost like, because why would you say that? Because you must feel you have the truth, and that the truth will kind of reveal itself in the end. So
Isn't that
that kind
true?
of
You'd have to be
self-confidence
so you
really
have to
drew
be
me.
so confident
Yeah,
that what you have is real to be able to make an assertion like that. That's so
yeah.
true.
That's what drew me to it. So yeah.
Oh, me as well. Yeah. Dana, would you like to share?
I want to go back to the beginning, about how you said that Buddhism is a religion, and so is secular Buddhism a religion? We don't have, we're not focused on the deities or those sort of things you mentioned that other religions have. So then it made me think: is secular Buddhism a religion?
Sure. So when we talk about religion as all of those things, we're implying that different people practice and approach Buddhism in different ways. If you go to any Buddhist country, the devotion and just
Mm.
religiousness of the devoted is so obvious, right? It's supernatural, it's devotional, it's worship. It looks just like a religion. But you bring up a great point. I think in secular Buddhism, we can look at it in two different ways. And I've been writing a piece on this. I've been wanting to finish. And so the idea, some people see secular Buddhism as the name implies, a purely secular presentation of Buddhism. And Stephen Batchelor, I think, has a stronger feeling like that, while other groups interpret it more as that the secular Buddhist view is a spectrum between purely secular and Buddhism itself, right? More traditional. I favor the latter. I favor the second, because the problem when you posit a purely secular Buddhism, in a sense, you're telling everybody what to believe if they're going to be a part of your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And Batchelor kind of does that. He has a list of what you're not allowed to believe to consider yourself a secular Buddhist. That seems very odd to me. And isn't that a great deal of the dogma that we're all moving away from religion for? So in my idea is seeing it as a spectrum. Of course, SBT, we don't like to tell people what to do, what to think, or what to believe. we think that that is a personal belief, right? And so we like to give the space for everybody in the organization to believe for themselves. Um, there's a great amount of belief in Buddhism, and which parts are uncomfortable um, are different for everyone. I always had a problem with the idea of heaven and hell, the six realms of existence,
Mhm.
mythical beings, things like that. So it made me clearly I was a secular Buddhist, but then rebirth I've never had a problem with. But then again, I don't believe I know that rebirth is real. So it is a belief. It's not something I know. So for each one of us, we all have to decide that for ourselves.
Mhm.
Some of the members in our Sangha like a lot of the more religious aspects, not the beliefs, but maybe the rituals. Maybe some of our Sangha members like to recite mantras. It's not my place to tell anybody else what to think. So with SBT, we offer this spectrum. Our our curriculum is what bonds us all together. Our curriculum is a secular curriculum. We'll talk about beliefs from Buddhism, but we'll always make it clear this is from the sutras. This is what the Buddha taught. We'll never imply that people here need to believe this or that.
I think that
What do you think of that?
well, I think what I get out, what's similar to other religions is you, for me anyway, what I've heard is I have to have faith. I have to believe to test this out. I have to, even though the meditation at the beginning was like my mind was jumping all over the place or whatever.
I disagree. I don't think trying something out requires belief. You can just give it a try you can evaluate without belief. I think a belief comes in after you've evaluated it and you find it to be true.
Mm,
Maybe that's
well,
just semantics.
yeah, but I think that you are an example of following the Buddha's ideas, and that we see that you have some equanimity, and so that it says, oh, well, maybe that's possible. So,
Very much so. Following a teacher and seeing those qualities in a teacher is very much one of those aspects. Yeah, I agree.
okay,
And clearly, all secular Buddhists are Buddhists, right? So I'm a Buddhist. There's no doubt about it. And then sometimes in certain circles, people have a problem seeing a monastic as a secular Buddhist. And actually, it's quite logical that monasticism isn't a philosophy; it's a training. It's a training that I've chose that I really appreciate and enjoy. I find it very fruitful. But my philosophy is different. My philosophy is secular Buddhist, right? I have trouble believing in all that mysticism. It's not a part of my belief system. So I never see a problem with monasticism and secular Buddhism. They're totally compatible. In fact, secular Buddhism, there's nothing mystical or religious in secular Buddhism. Oh, I'm sorry. In monasticism, in Vinaya, there's really nothing religious or mystical in Vinaya, right? It's all just kind of straightforward how you live your life. So, in so many ways, I find them to be beautifully compatible. The problem is with a lot of secular Buddhists, they see monasticism as a priestly class, a religious occupation that hold authority over others. I've never considered that a part of my monasticism. That's not how I see myself. I think monastics are just very strong, committed practitioners. But in the early sutras, the Buddha was clear that monastics aren't supposed to be priests. They're just very strong, committed practitioners.
Venerable
Is it,
Tarpa,
please.
Andy had a question. He said last week you said that Buddhism is the method, not the rules. So he's asking, is the Dharma maybe considered the rules?
No, the Dharma is all of it. So the Dharma is is the teaching, the philosophy, but also the method, right? It encompasses all of the Buddha's work, right? Usually we translate Dharma for Buddhist to the Buddhist teachings, or we call it Buddha Dharma, right? So it includes that. It includes all the brilliant teachings of the Buddha. It includes all his prescriptions, all his methods, but it also includes walking the path, which would be the Vinaya, is how to put these practices into practice and improve your lives. This is a very important topic and one that goes around. You guys like the idea of SBT representing that spectrum? Do you, to me, I just can't imagine anything else. How can I sit here and dictate to everyone what you have to not believe in to be a member of SBT? That's absolutely, and if you remember at the end of every teaching, what do we say? SBT was created for one purpose, to support practitioners. We don't ask anything from practitioners. We're not asking anybody to believe or do or think anything. We offer a curriculum, we offer practice guides, we teach methods, but we never tell anyone they have to do them. We share the Buddhist teachings in a very secular way, a very open way. We look at all of the different traditions. We try to give you the broadest, most open view of Buddhism so you yourself can decide where you are on the path or what the path is to you. I'm not arrogant enough to believe that I can decide for any of you that. I don't know that that I'm right, right? We're agnostics first, right? We understand the nature of information. You know, we have so many cognitive biases. Can we ever be really sure? And another point that David brought up last week that maybe is a good time to say it again is that, you know, with teachings that are 2.5 millennia ago, that weren't written down till 500 years after the Buddha's death, and they've been clearly added to and edited throughout its long history. How sure can any of us be of what the Buddha really taught? And the answer is that the broader we study Buddhism and we find those commonalities throughout the teachings, then there's a certain level of certainty, right? That you can say, oh yeah, all the Buddhist traditions, we find this quality. And it's mentioned over and over again. And then maybe more importantly, when I practice it, I find it to be true, right? In Buddhism, they talk about two ways of verifying teachings. One, that you can find it in the actual sutras. And secondly, that it arises from authentic practice. And here they're kind of implying more of a master who really has an understanding of the Dharma. So in teaching, I can share my experience of the Dharma and consider it authentic Dharma because I've studied the Dharma deeply and fully, and then the experiences arise from it. I should be able to trust. Quite fascinating, isn't it? Sample, please.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things often you'll say, Tarpa, when we talk about things is that, you know, this was written in the Dark Ages. You know, we don't live in the Dark Ages, so we're bringing the Dharma into a more modern environment to understand its implications and how we apply it, etc. If we think about Christianity, for example, the Bible has been translated so many times. There's various different versions of it. The actual parts of the Bible were written often way after the events originally happened. There's a
Yeah,
whole lot of different things, you know, that you then look at, and there's
and
so many.
it's not just religion, right?
Yeah, there's so many. Yeah,
Knowledge does that.
absolutely. And there's so
All
many
knowledge
different parts
follows
of
it.
the Bible that are so
Yeah,
outdated. Look at Leviticus, for example, and you know that just for me is an example of how outdated the Bible can actually be seen.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
One objection I have, I don't think I ever said that Buddhism was in the Dark Ages back there.
No,
That's not
sorry,
what
no.
a,
There's a couple of times when you talked about explaining something, and you said, but it was written in the Dark Ages, and we look at it from a modern perspective. I can't
okay.
remember. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think at the Buddhist time probably would have been quite an enlightened time. But thank you. I appreciate that very much. And so for secular Buddhists, we're trying to just look at it all through fresh eyes, right? And also we're not afraid to look at it through all the different traditions. I study all the traditions of Buddhism. I have in all their different countries. I've been in monasteries in every Buddhist country and every tradition. And so this brings a wealth of wisdom to it, doesn't it? Right? A lot of the traditions, and it's changing, but a lot of the traditions are still really stuck in their presentation, right? The Mahayana, if you're a Mahayanist, you take a vow to never become a Theravada. Isn't that a weird thing to ask people? In Bodhisattva vows, you take a vow to never fall into the lower Theravada vehicle. Isn't that a horrible thing to ask somebody? It doesn't sound very Buddhist to me. Nevertheless, hey, you want to carry on? Oh, I appreciate your participation. You guys really bring some nuance to the conversation. And so again, in the Buddha's day, the Buddha didn't advocate, oh, the Buddha advocated mental and emotional development. He didn't advocate prayer or worship, right? So this is why many think that originally the Buddha wasn't teaching a religion, but the Buddha still believed in rebirth. The Buddha still, in the Buddha's words, he talks about mythical creatures, all kinds of things. So I think right from I used to say Buddhism wasn't a religion, and I really think I was wrong. I think I've changed my mind on that. Um, he substituted ethics for ritual while condemning all forms of divination and soothsaying. Monks were not permitted to do any kind of that. Um, in fact, the further back you go in the Buddhist time, the less religious it appears to be. The early teachings, uh, we see the we see the emergence of the world's first truly egalitarian social movement, meaning that everyone, regardless of race, of culture, gender, the caste system, all had the same potential for spiritual development. Men, women, everybody. And at the heart of the Buddha's earliest teachings, he advocated benevolence, goodness, wisdom, altruism, compassion, of course, but also nonviolence, honesty, friendliness. Oftentimes, that doesn't translate to modern Buddhism. The Buddha said a lot about being friendly, self control, personal responsibility, selflessness, humility, while abandoning ignorance, delusion, hatred, and greed. The earliest accounts of the Buddha, which we mentioned before, are referred to as the EBTs, early Buddhist teachings. These teachings show a much more, in my opinion, an open, fluid, and adaptive style than many of the modern traditions. It doesn't seem to be so bogged down in authority, dogma, and absolutism. Those are some of the things that also made me a secular Buddhist. Living in a monastery for 10 years, as you can imagine, I got a good taste of religious authority and dogma and absolutism. And absolutism means um, seeing everything as in black and white, right? The Buddha had a great teaching in which he talks about one of the biggest problems with human beings is we see everything as this or that. You can call this binary thinking or absolutism, that everything is this or everything is that, that we're blind to the spectrum that is the true nature of our experiences. Everything in our lives exists in a spectrum. It's not black and white like that. And the Buddha places authority where it properly belongs, with the individual themselves. And so, as you can imagine, that's another big part of SBT, that we let the individual decide what's proper for them. Because like the Buddha, we have full confidence that you all possess the ability to examine and recognize the truth for yourself. And lastly, I wanted to talk about that the Buddha's approach to teaching was quite different for the time. You know, he's born into a world where there's two primary religions. There's Brahmanism, which is a householder's existence based on pleasure, and it's based on having lots of boy babies and being successful, uh, 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 making money, things like that. And then on the other side, we had Jainism, which is a precursor to Buddhism, still a viable religion in India. It's not a large religion, but I studied for quite a bit with the Jains in South India, and extraordinary path. And but the Jains were ascetics. They were out in the woods with oftentimes naked, and even still today, a lot of the priests walk around naked, which presents a bit of a problem in modern India, but they still do the practice, and just with nothing. And so, and the Buddha believed his path was between these two, and you could say the middle way between pain and pleasure, right? This is it. But the Buddha had a much more scientific approach. He didn't have a religious approach. He wasn't citing ancient texts. He wasn't uh, talking about things handed down from the heavens. Uh, he rejected supernatural and any belief that supernatural forces had any control over our lives at all, right? His approach, some argue that they didn't necessarily have science in those days, but it was based on investigation, right? Logical, rational investigation. He advocated understanding by way of analysis, reason, and experience, urging his followers to refuse to believe in anything without proper investigation. That's a popular phrase in Tibetan Buddhism, that they'll say, nothing in Buddhism is taken on blind faith, right? Everything is investigated. Um, but when referring to himself, the Buddha would often refer to himself as a physician or a healer. Isn't that fascinating? Because what the and sometimes I think maybe he was saying psychologist, because in so many ways Buddhism seems like an ancient form of cognitive therapy, right? Teaching people, adjusting the people's perspective and perceptions, allowing them to live better lives. That's a lot what therapists and psychologists do. Um, but the Buddha had a clear and practical focus to heal people's minds and hearts. The Buddha's teachings focused on what is practical and healing, a methodized treatment for the suffering that plagues human existence. And another famous piece that I'm sure you're all familiar with, that the Buddha would often urge his followers not to overanalyze, overstudy. His idea was, yes, you need knowledge, you need information, but just enough so you can achieve awakening, right? And this idea that people are just uh, trapped in this analysis, overanalyzing, overstudying. He found that to be quite a detrimental part of practice. He talked about it being stuck in thorns and nettles. And one monk, story of one monk, he wants to know all the secrets to the universe. And the Buddha seems a bit irritated. The Buddha reaches down and grabs a handful of leaves off the ground, and he says to the practitioner, he says, "Are there more leaves in my hand, or in all the trees of the forest?" And the student says, oh, clearly all the trees in the forest have much more leaves than your hand. And he said, this is the equivalent to the knowledge for awakening. You don't need to know everything in the universe. What you want to do is you want to work, you want to apply yourself and seek liberation. That's what the Buddha encourages us to do. Find your liberation. You don't have to be a giant scholar knowing every fact known to man. Okay, your turn. You got any thoughts, everybody? Oh, yeah, Mr. Dundo, please.
Yeah, how much or how fair is it to say that the Buddha was reacting against Hinduism? And what I mean by that, you have the Atman in Hinduism, you have Anatta in Buddhism, you have moksha in Hinduism, and you have nirvana. And to me, and then you may have some Hindus believe in a creator God. We, believe in dependent origination. So
Yeah.
when I look at it that way, kind of the flow from Hinduism, was he reacting against it, and was he secularizing Hinduism in a way?
Well, clearly it's a reaction to it, but again, it's a reaction to both. And of course, Hinduism doesn't exist then; it's Brahmanism, which is the precursor to Hinduism. And so, yes, he's reacting against the two: Brahmanism on one side and Jainism on the other. And as we talked about the Buddha's story, clearly he did a lot of Jain practices, the ones of starvation, and they would burn the body, but use suffering to try to reach awakening. So very much so. And throughout the sutras, he's often in dialogue with the Brahmins or the Jains, and there's great stories in which he'll use their own methodology or their own terminology to explain things. Like when they talk about monastics aren't allowed to touch fire, a lot of people believe that means the Brahmanism's practice of keeping three fires. They would touch fire and touch it to their eyes as a ritual. So yeah, continuously all through the scriptures. Yeah.
A question: what would you consider? You mentioned the EBTs, early Buddhist texts. What is considered the corpus of Buddhist texts that are in addition to that? What is the
Oh, it's called the
totality?
Buddhist canon or the Tripitaka. Tripitaka means three baskets. And so there's three canons in the world. There's the Pali canon, there's the Tibetan canon, which was translated from the Sanskrit, and there's the Chinese canon. So those are the three existing canons in the world. And they're very they're very much the same thing, slight differences, but it's quite amazing that they've all been preserved and they still remain so similar to some precursor. One important thing I think for secular Buddhists is to recognize the three baskets are: first is Vinaya, and that's the discipline, or let's say the training and path of practitioners. The second is Sutra, which are the teachings of the Buddha and other high practitioners. And the third is Abhidharma. So the first two are assumed that they come directly from the Buddha. The Abhidharma is an attempt to methodize the first two baskets into a real kind of curriculum. And so this happened hundreds of years after the death of the Buddha. And there's some things that are interesting, like in the early days, each different form of Theravada had their own Abhidharma, right? And then they kind of finally settle on one. And you can find that in the other canons as well. But clearly the Buddha didn't write it. And there's people are on both sides of the fence on this. Some people think it's just an abolishment of Buddhism, that that it was changed and altered. Other people think it's just a brilliant piece of work. So, but I remain skeptical of it. I've studied it in depth, but I like to think of the Buddhist canon as the two baskets, Vinaya and Sutra. And those first early Buddhist teachings, they call the Nikaya Sutras. So you can read about them. And most scholars believe they're most likely the most authentic of sutras. And one way they can kind of look at the Buddhist teachings and try to gain some kind of certainty is that there's several voices that scholars point to in the sutras, that clearly it's not a single author, right? And I find that true as well. And it's not just secular Buddhists. Some of my very devout Theravada scholar friends, these days, a lot of them are really trying to tease out commentary from the sutras. I had a friend in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, and just a brilliant, brilliant Theravada scholar. And that seemed like he was preoccupied with that. No matter what was said, he would tell you commentary or sutra. And that was his life duty to tease out the commentaries by later monastics. So this is something that's going on around the world. And the same is being done in the Mahayana as well. So it's a lot of us are doing this, not just the secular Buddhists.
Tarpa, Padma had a question. He's asking, was one basket for the monastics only?
A Vinaya is often thought of as for the monastic order, but it's not true. All the lay ordained prescribed things are found there as well. So that's why, it's predominantly monastic. The Buddha gives a lot more prescription to monastics and lay people, but it's all there. So that's why I translate it as training and practice. All the vows, lay vows, monastic vows, they're all found there. And what's also said is that nowadays, a great deal of Western Buddhist groups seem to be setting aside Vinaya, that a lot of people aren't taking vows. I think they find them to be religious. Secular Buddhism very much doesn't follow it, but also like the mindfulness movement, and this was the advice from the Buddha on how to live his path, right? Sutra is more philosophical in nature. The stories, the nature of reality. But Vinaya is the Buddha's training advice. So the Buddha saying, well, you want to be enlightened. Here's the sutras is your study information, but Vinaya is your practice instructions. This is training in the Buddhist path. Now, is it just me, or can't you see the importance of that? And how some people say, well, it doesn't agree with me. I'm going to set it aside, right? It cuts into my Netflix time. And there's no doubt we can be fairly certain of its authenticity. It's not like the Abhidharma that was written much later. Vinaya and all the canons is basically the same. So I have a high degree of confidence that the Buddha actually did write all of that or teach it, and it was written down at a later time. I hope that's helpful. You find this information exciting, interesting? Oh, yes, Tensatashi, please.
I do. I love this. I love hearing about this. I was just wanting to comment that it just so happened that last night, my husband and I watched a program that had Joseph Campbell on it, and he talked, it was like a comparative myth, the myth
Myth
thing.
and Mythology.
Yeah.
His famous
And-
book, yeah.
But I love the way he talked about the Buddha, because everything he said, it like is everything you're saying, so I just like that was so cool. So
He
yeah,
was
I
wonderful,
didn't,
boy.
yeah, it was. Thank you.
David, please.
I'd just like to say, Tarpa, that I found tonight's session incredibly useful. I think it was just outstanding, even by your standards. So,
Thank you. Yes, it's the participation that really makes the teachings come to life, right? It encourages me to think in a different way. But as secular Buddhists, this what we're talking about today is probably the most interesting, right? This is kind of where the heart of our curiosity is. You know, what can we be certain about? What should we follow? What shouldn't we?
Also think it's important because like I think many of us come from like a Western and or Christian background, so it's a different framework of thinking about like Bible, the Bible, Old and New Testament, and that framework, and then this is like a different way of thinking about how to construct like, this canon, and so I just appreciate just kind of getting reframed to how things are talked about in this new.
Yeah, can you see how the Buddha is trying to free our minds, where religions, I wouldn't say they're trying to trap our minds, but in a lot of ways they're trying to console our minds, right? Here's a set of beliefs that you can use when life is difficult, where the Buddha's trying to get us to open up our minds and find the truth for ourselves. Liberation, right? And so the word awakening is quite a proper term, isn't it? Awakening to the way things really are, not being stuck in dogma and belief systems of what we'd like things to be. You know, we'd like our loved ones that pass away to be living in a land of milk and honey, sitting around with celestial beings and enjoying themselves in everlasting peace. It would be nice if it's true, but the Buddha is really trying to awaken us. And in modern talk, we talk about the Buddha's trying to free us of all these cognitive biases, right? We have nowadays there's so many cognitive biases we have about things that just aren't true. Yeah. Hey, should we wrap things up? I had a lot of fun. So, hey, our mind training program is still going on Mondays with Tenzin Samten. That's tomorrow at 1600 UTC. Beautiful program if you haven't been before. You don't have to start at the beginning. They're beautiful verses. Tomorrow's verse 3, and they're all there to create more compassion in all of us. Everyone's welcome to attend. It's an easy class. It's a lot of fun. And so very exciting. And then next weekend is our last class of level 1 introduction to meditation. And that program has been really fun as well. We'll take a little break before getting into level 2. Okay, with all of that said, why don't we end today with our altruistic affirmation? May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is the source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. And again, I'd like to remind everybody, SBT was formed for one purpose and one purpose only, to support practitioners in any way they want to practice. We're here just to support honest, authentic practitioners. You can believe what you want to believe. Thanks, friends. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Tarpa.
Tarpa.